Hey,
How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. You should feel honored that I'm gracing you on my birthday, with such a
What? Happy birthday.
yeah. So, but
Have you been able to enjoy your birthday?
a little bit. Yeah, I
Are you a
always
birthday
like to
guy?
do I like to try to do some kind of good physical feat on my birthday. And I woke up this morning and like had this like the sharpest pain in like my subscap area. I was like, all right, well, it's hard to breathe right now, so I don't think I'm doing much. But my wife and I went for breakfast, so that was something.
Hey,
But
it's a physical feat. You had sharp pain. Were you able to enjoy your breakfast?
yeah, yeah.
There you go.
Um,
There you go.
yeah, some corned beef hash. It was pretty good. So
There you go.
yeah, but uh,
How was the holidays?
pretty good. Busy. Got COVID. So
Oh man.
made it to New York New Year's. 9 o'clock p.m. West Coast time. I was like, all right, time to shut it down.
Yeah. Oh man. Are you feeling better?
Yeah, yeah. I'm. We kind of got it right after Christmas, and then we're just, it was funny actually. My wife texted me. I was leaving the gym. I just done like a workout, and she's like, "Hey, I just tested positive for COVID," and I was like, "I don't feel good either. I'm sure I have it, and I just worked out." So, oh, all right, it's not that.
Man.
So, but how about you?
I didn't get a lot of time off, but it was
Okay.
nice. Went to Chicago before Christmas, saw
Oh,
the
nice.
in-laws,
Okay.
and then got
Are they in
back in
Chicago
time.
proper, or are they like in a suburb, or
No, just north of Chicago. Yeah.
okay, like
Um,
Evanston, or?
Not that far north. They're Arlington Heights.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Um, so it's nice. I need to get back into Chicago. I still miss working there.
Yeah.
I was at Adler for a while, and
Okay.
yeah, there's days I miss my red line commute, and there's days I don't. So,
Yes. Yeah. But
but
when
no,
you
it was
lived
good.
there, where were you live? Were you living in the city, or were you?
Yeah, I was Lakeview,
Okay.
Wrigleyville area, so just kind
Yeah.
of right in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
I was only there just under 2 years, and I left for a military job. I don't regret it. All works out because
Yeah.
obviously now I met my wife, right? But uh, pro professionally and city wise, it's been very difficult to find a city that's really fun to work in, and
Mm.
Chicago was one of them, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that was just a cool balance, and I'll never forget it. I'm happy in Minneapolis. My family's here. Like
Okay.
it's Chicago West, just not the same scale. So
Right.
it's not like I'm slumming, but
Yeah.
I have positive memories. So
Yeah. I was like in Chicago for like 10 years, and the last little bit that I was like single before my wife and I got married, actually I lived with a roommate right by Lakeview High School.
oh wow,
It was just south of like Irving Park.
oh yeah,
I still have memory, like we'd go up on the rooftop of this brownstone we were in, and we could hear Pearl Jam playing from Wrigley Field. They were doing a concert there, and we just like sat up there and just heard them play for a bit. So
that's fun. And
yeah.
so and I'm hijacking your story just for a minute, but the my last place was one block off. It was on Kenmore Avenue, just away
Okay.
from the stadium.
Yeah.
So whenever the bands were warming up on Saturdays for their
Yeah.
concerts, I just opened my windows and I heard them all. Pearl Jam, Billy Joel.
Nice.
I was like, all right, free concert. Maybe I'd walk down to Murray's or Murphy's on the corner
Yep.
and grab a beer while I'm listening, just walk back. Like it was a one block
Oh,
walk. So it was
that's
like I
awesome.
felt like I could be there even though I wasn't in it. So yeah,
Yep.
like
Yep.
but
Yeah. Yeah. My regret, I mean, when I was living there, I was pretty poor. So I couldn't enjoy the city quite as much as I would have liked if I'd had a little bit more cash in my pocket. So that was,
yeah, a little
so
different.
yeah. Yeah. But the military job you took, where was that? Where did that move you to?
That was in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. So that was in Sierra Vista, just south of Tucson.
Okay. My grandpa, who was in the army, he spent some time at Fort Huachuca back in like the 50s during like the Korean War, I think, or something.
I don't think it's evolved much. I it did not have much to offer. I was willing to commute from Tucson. Uh,
Okay.
but that was it was a great gig.
Yeah.
Great gig. But yeah, that drive I do not miss. About an
Okay.
hour and a half each way every day. It's like, nope.
Oh, yeah.
So you
That's
got real comfortable with your driving routines.
yes. Yeah. Get your like all your podcasts uploaded.
Yep, get them all loaded up, ready to go.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was all good.
Yeah.
Um, well, so couple updates with the community since you're just on here right now, and then we can
Yeah.
dive into things. Um, I have some more speakers coming in on different aspects of mindfulness.
Okay.
So since it's just you for right now, we can just Q&A and go over some questions you have
Yeah.
before I finish the recording for the rest of the community.
Okay.
Um, but I have someone coming in specifically to train on ACT.
Oh,
My training is more of mindfulness-based stress reduction
okay.
model, which is a little bit of what we'll see tonight.
Yeah. Cool.
Um, and then my main goal for tonight is just to make sure we're very clear on the philosophy of mindfulness and we're understanding what it represents before we start diving into these different niches
Okay.
and separating kind of that Western psychology from the philosophy itself.
Yep.
Um, so there's that piece. I might try and get Eric back in. He was a speaker last year. He was someone who trained me a little bit as well because he comes from the mindfulness based stress reduction, but he's very well read on
Okay.
the other um, mindfulness approaches that are out there. So I like him because he can kind of answer some of those questions on, if I'm going to look at this, like how broad do I need to be versus narrow? Like I think he's very wise in that regard.
Mm.
Um, so just from in terms of the mindfulness track, just so you know how we're building on tonight, that's kind of where we're going with this stuff. But you'll also start noticing weekly events pretty regularly now.
Okay.
Um, so we have about 60 people in this thing now, and got some more schools coming in.
Nice.
So it makes it kind of fun. So I'm trying to do some more regular SIG group meetings now, so everyone can really just kind of hone in and focus in on the areas that they're interested in.
Hmm.
I'm hoping the get-togethers and the social hours and the networking stuff will grow as more people get comfortable with the platform.
Hmm.
But for now, I'm just trying to create regular conversations so people are kind of aware of what's happening. So just as
Okay.
a status update on the community, since you've seen a few different iterations on this thing now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, but for tonight, um, any questions off the top of the bat that you just wanted to dive into? When it comes to mindfulness, curious on where you're at. This isn't your first rodeo, I know, with mindfulness. So I'm
Right.
just curious on what would make most sense for you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm open to go kind of wherever. I didn't have a specific agenda. Um, I guess, I would be curious. Most of my most of my experience right now, is doing one-on-one with clients. I've done a couple of group things. Um, and just I mean, maybe I don't know if you would see much of a difference in individual work on mindfulness versus like if you're, I mean, I know the group is going to differ if it's a group of 5 versus 15 or 50,
Yeah.
but I don't know what you've seen in terms of like how those dynamics change when it's one versus many.
The dynamic changes in terms of my ability to adapt right there live on the
Yeah.
fly. Um, that's one thing that I've noticed big time. In really being able to um, quality control their understanding,
Uh-huh.
mainly because there's so much education around emotions
Mm.
and the idea of focusing. This
Yep.
is why I haven't completely embraced ACT.
Okay.
I think their strength is lives within the acceptance domain, clearly by its name, which is a
Yep.
tenant. I think it leaves a little less to be desired in the other couple areas, which I have kind of queued up for the presentation tonight.
Okay.
Um, because there's just more to mindfulness, and it's really not just this going with the flow type thing. So I only, anyway, the reason I say that is because with an individual, as they're going through the experience and they're kind of judging themselves as they go,
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to adjust on the fly. Hey, do you just realize that you just had a thought and an emotion? And what do we do with that now that you had it?
Yeah.
You can do some of that live, where in a group, you can kind of debrief at the end and you can talk about it. How many people just experienced X? What did you experience? You can facilitate that.
Yep.
Um, but especially with the football team that have tried to really push this the last few years with,
Yep.
we have our set routines that players either do or they don't.
Mm.
Because now it's part of pre-game routines or pre-practice warm-ups.
Okay.
And you just can't quality control it as much. I also chose not to use, although I was talking, I have talking about assessments tonight.
Yeah.
Um, I could have used those. I chose not to, um, just to kind of see their evolution in their learning.
Yep.
Um,
Mm.
but that was just a choice I made. So just, those are some of the differences I've noticed when trying to do this with a group versus an individual.
Yeah. Do you find you have to do a lot of education around like being able to name emotions? Like,
Yeah,
oh, something happened for me. But like, I mean, even when I'm doing clinical work, it's like, can you name like what that emotion or those emotions are? And, I do a lot of stuff like the anger iceberg, for instance, is like,
yeah,
you're feeling angry, but that's the only way that you've ever learned how to express or identify a negative emotion. I bet it's one or several of these things underneath, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't, when I take the mindfulness approach, I haven't found myself feeling like I had to define the emotions as much, more so than clarifying the role of it.
Okay.
So what purpose is this serving right now? What is it intended to do? Now, I also, um, one of the books I put in the community group that I like because it just resonates with my cognitive psychology background
Yeah.
is just the neuroscience behind it and the fact that it's just really more of a notification.
Mm.
So what does that even mean? Because if it's a notification, then where do I take control in this whole thing?
Yep.
So anyway, where I'm going with that is I found myself having to spend a lot more time on, hey, remember, this is the role of the emotion. Just like a text message, you just got notified. You
Mm.
need to be aware of it, but an emotion isn't like you're trying to read it like it's a chapter book. There ain't anything there. It's just a feeling.
Yeah.
Now, what are you going to do? And
Mm.
kind of getting that habit built, it just kind of takes the power out of it. Now, that's only a piece of it, because it kind of lays the foundation around acceptance of just human nature, right?
Mhm.
So emotions are inevitable. Um, so that's what I mean by the role. So it tends to fall into that conversation a lot more and really just making that a habit. But the other tenet of mindfulness, though, which is funny that school fights against this so much, and they always say that CBT and mindfulness don't go together, but attention. It's just as labor intensive as sports psychology traditional training is when it comes to attention, because it's
Mm.
all about focused attention.
Yep.
It's just that mindfulness tends to be more single task with things. Like, if my job is to be present right now, then my job is to be present right now. That's my focus. If
Yep.
my job is to watch the receiver, then that's my job.
Hmm.
And anything else is a distraction. Um, but I can be observant of that. If I'm mindful, I'm observant of that experience, right? I'm right there. I'm aware of the present experience without judging myself for it, which brings me a lot more clarity, a lot more accuracy, the ability to readjust my attention. So we kind of tend to talk about it that way.
Yeah.
Um, so then it ends up, so from a team perspective, this is where I almost have to design it like strength and conditioning coaches because it just has to be really cliche buzzwords. So then it's like, hey, here's the three core pillars of our training program:
Mm,
set intentions, have acceptance, blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
And then here's how we build those things. Here's why it's related to football. Here's how it helps us navigate pre snap. Here's how it helps us navigate the sideline. So that way it doesn't feel so jargon heavy to them. But they
Yeah.
don't need to know that our primary training method is going to be meditation,
Yeah.
which is tough because that I led with that the first go, and that like,
Uh,
but I forced them to do it. I said, "You're going to deal with it, tough," and because I had that rapport, I'd already been there 4 years with these guys.
okay.
So I didn't care. They all saw me as Coach Russ. So I'm like, they're like, this is weird. I'm like, too bad. Deal with it.
Right.
So, um, but that's just kind of how I've tried to kind of mask it
Yeah.
because and you'll see it when we go through a couple of these things, um, but that's where the mindfulness based stress reduction and wisdom literature have really kind of come together well with me.
Okay.
Because it's the idea of let's just help people be mindful.
Yes.
Am I thoughtful? Or am I just always having these knee jerk, um, emotionally charged or automated responses? Right. I'm just kind of going about my day, not really putting a lot of thought behind it. And
Yeah.
that's at the core of this. And people get that, I think, when you kind of talk to them about it at that level versus leading with a meditation or an exercise.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Mm. Okay.
now, ACT, I won't touch much on it because I'll let Chrissy do it. But I mean, there's a whole progression program. It's very regimented. It's got different steps. Um, I tend to shy away from models like that sometimes because are you teaching to the model or are you addressing the situation?
Yeah.
Um, Now, I don't want to do it disservice. It already just sounded like I did, so I'll let Chrissy do it. But that's something we just have to keep in mind because mindfulness just isn't taught the same way other courses are. So we just kind of have to make sense of it the best we can as we come across it.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the way, well, you changed your approach from that first time doing it, but thinking about starting with the hook or starting with like presenting a problem and then like, oh, here's, how do we address the problem? I guess I would imagine describing for your athletes or your performers something effective like what basically, I don't know, painting a picture of when you don't have awareness or you're not kind of in the present moment, what kind of negative outcomes happen for you in your performance.
Yeah, so that type of conversation happens a lot more in team settings.
Yeah.
Individuals are usually there for a reason. So if they're having performance anxiety, it's a pretty easy sell,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Because it's impacting your ability to perform.
Yeah.
So they kind of bring their own sales pitch in. It's just me to just not get in the way of that. Um, the with the group stuff though, yeah, you're going to have that more of that conversation. And it's actually pretty easy to get it out of them because you don't even have to manufacture it. It's just um, when you struggle, what's going on, right? Or why is it so hard to let go of mistakes, right? Just ask the obvious cliche questions. What's going on there?
Yeah.
Um, and they'll tell you, we'll put it all up here, and it's going to fall in something around the realm of thoughts and emotions. Um, but I don't usually um, teach something like acceptance independent of also talking about attention focus. So usually the progression for me is I'm educating on what do we know about how our attention works.
Hmm.
And so I'll do usually an observation exercise. Just observe this object.
Hmm.
That's usually my opener.
Okay.
Observe this object, 2 minutes. If your mind drifts off, just note it. talk about it after. That's it. And then we'll just say, all right, how many people drifted off at least once, twice, three times? And then we could just kind of highlight, well, it doesn't really matter. Point is, we can focus and our attention drifts. That's the basic tenets of how our attention works.
Yeah.
Why it does it doesn't matter. It doesn't. And then that really kind of sets up right now. I gave you a basic bottle to stare at. That's so boring. So your attention is going to really drift even more.
Mm.
During competition, if your emotions are stronger than your focus, which one's going to win, right? The emotions. It's going to grab you. So we can really practice what it's like to really strengthen our attention because one, if we can do that, that in of itself is going to lower distractions. If we're just better with how we focus. But then two, we can manage distractions more effectively. Well, this is how we go about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
As humans, we're hardwired to experience fear, anxiety, judgment, and that basic biological hardwiring is impacting your ability to be consistent with your attention. So that's a way, right? But you can do an exercise like that. Otherwise, you just go through common situations that you know you're going to run into
Mm.
after a turnover, few bad drives, um, things like that. And then they start talking about it, and you're just saying, "Hey, here's how we address it."
Mm. Yep. Yeah.
Doesn't mean I've had full buy-in by no means,
Right.
but but it's still about with the coaching staff. So when I'm with groups, the coaches got to be on board. That's been the tough part.
Mm.
The coaches give me the floor, but if they're not reinforcing it, because one of my pitches to coaches is like, I don't need everybody bought in as long as it's part of practice,
Mm.
because
Right.
then they're all going to do it, right? Not everybody likes their drill work. Not everyone's excited about every drill they have to do during practice,
Yep.
but they still do drills because everybody's doing that drill.
Right.
So I go, if we can kind of put it in that way, then at least they're all practicing and they're developing that habit. So anyway, those are just some different points, but that's less to do with mindfulness and just things in general, when you're
Right.
trying to get buy-in on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. I mean, I guess on some level, yeah, I mean, sure, they're going to run into some resistance, but it is like a self-selecting group of coaches or admins who are even like willing to hear your pitch, right? I mean, somebody who's not even willing, like who's not at all open to this stuff isn't even going to invite you in, right?
Well, the context of, are you working with them or you're trying to get them to work with you?
Well, I mean, going back to like you trying to get buy-in or like trying to get the coach to integrate it into practice or things like that. I mean, I guess there's another level of commitment by the coach there, but I guess the fact that you're there teaching it at all says that he's somewhat bought in, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. He
Yeah.
gets it. And so there's, all of us stylistically have our own kind of approach to why what we do matters.
Mhm.
And ours resonated with him,
Yeah.
with how we went about it. This just happened to be a one of the things we did.
Okay.
So yeah, he's all in on that. Um, but there's also other things that have made it hard over each year. I just don't have as much time to be down there.
Mm.
Um, my first 2 years, I was there twice a week rotating, like it really got really strong rapport. I made one game this year. I mean, it was tough. And so I'm probably going to have to stop working with him this year, at least in that type of capacity.
Yeah.
Um, so, but yeah, so no, he was completely bought in. It was just a matter of, I could have put my foot down and said, you guys need to do this, and they would. Um, but I didn't have the bandwidth to reinforce it. So I was like, I'm
Yeah.
just going to kind of get it out to the team. We've had systems in places. This is just something they can put into our system.
Mm.
They don't, it's not the end all be all.
Yep.
but it's definitely something I believe strongly in. If you really want to manage stress, improve your clarity, composure, focus, I'm much more mindfulness based these days than ever before.
Mm.
Um, but I think I've gotten more creative with things to complement around it. Um, because we're so conditioned, so I primarily do a lot with college. We're so conditioned by the time we're college age, you're just so judgmental on everything. So I might be teaching these concepts, but I actually use instructional self-talk to drive it home with it.
Oh,
So hey, when you're having these moments, you really need to tell yourself X, Y, and Z. It's
mm.
okay. This is just a thought, right? So
Yep.
really, really driving it home. I go, you need those reminders because you got to recondition your brain.
Yep.
Um, so those are some things that, although self-talk isn't part of mindfulness training traditionally, I mean, this is also why I think thought stopping and reframing is semantics. Because what are we doing? Even from a mindfulness perspective, we are deliberately raising our awareness and paying attention to everything
Yep.
and slowly conditioning ourselves to be more observant and less judgmental.
Mm.
But when I was doing my one-on-one coaching training with that Eric Leslie, who's still has his recording in our community group,
Mm.
uh, we'd be going in the middle of a meditation and going through some training, and it'd be like I'd be telling myself, "Stop! Don't think that way."
Mm.
And he goes, "Who cares?" And so we kind of laughed because it's like if a Buddhist monk was watching us, they probably would laugh at like how analytical we are about this
Yeah.
because it's part of the journey to start learning to change your relationships with thoughts and emotions. And
Yeah.
if it means you got to start saying stop to yourself at first to catch it, then who cares? So I think there's some that's the Western psychology that's just very literal and linear. That might be kind of getting mixed in a little bit with just the idea of if I'm being more mindful and I'm really slowing down and I'm really being deliberate, then I might have some choice language in there that maybe wouldn't be a traditional approach, but it's
Mm.
still getting me there.
Well, I also wonder if some of that value is, given in our context with certain time restraints, right? You might have like you have a shot clock, you have a play clock, you have, the next pitch, whatever it is, like you have a short amount of time to reset and refocus. And
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you, I don't want to paint a wrong picture of mindfulness, from the Eastern perspective, but if you have that time constraint, then you don't have as much time to kind of like let your mind wander and then like gently bring it back. It's like, hey, you got to catch that quick and bring it back to focus because there's another play, there's something else we got to get back to, right?
Well, and they would probably say if you're practicing, then you'll be able to do it.
Sure.
But that's where like one of the routines I really like is just breathe first, do diaphragmatic breathing because you're going
Mhm.
to physically start to relax yourself.
Yep.
Then be accepting. Tell yourself it's okay. It's just a thought, just an emotion. It's okay. And you might go in that cycle for 10 seconds, breathing and telling yourself it's okay. Once you started to calm down, now refocus. What's your win? What's important now?
Yeah.
You know, it's quick, something like that. That's just a way. There's a lot of these types of things out there. Um, but it still has mindfulness tenets of
Mhm.
acceptance and attention, right?
Yeah.
So it's still in there. Just had to put it into a routine for somebody to make it game ready.
Mm. Yeah. Mm. Does your do your procedures change? I mean, I wonder if you're doing prescriptions for like in-game versus like post-game, like as athletes are reviewing tape or even just in the locker room kind of rehashing the game and kind of yeah, I don't know when there is more time or obviously, whether it's a win or like in a loss, you might be kind of emotionally charged. You kind of
Okay.
it applies no matter what, or would you kind of say, let's think about this a little bit differently if we're in the game or, halftime versus after the game or the day later?
No, it's the same. It's
Yeah.
completely the same. It's just there isn't the time constraint.
Yeah.
Um, but also though, ultimately, I want them to get to a point where they're not looking at it as something to fix, because you've really hit it when you can just be aware of what's going on and still cut right through it and get on task. Um, that's when you're doing pretty well.
Because
Um,
that fix implies kind of a judgment, right?
what's that?
When like I'd say the fix implies a judgment, right? And if mindfulness
Exactly,
is supposed
exactly.
to
Yep,
without judgment, right? Yeah.
yep.
Like, huh.
Because these aren't things that we can stop from happening,
Yeah.
because they do serve a purpose. Like an emotion is a notification of something.
Yeah.
If I experience an uncomfortable emotion, biologically speaking, I need to pay attention to that. Something's up.
Yeah.
So why is it all of a sudden a bad thing if I make a mistake and get that same sensation
Hmm.
that something's wrong with me? So that's where the relationship piece I think is always interesting, because so many athletes will say, I know I shouldn't feel this way. I'm like, well, you messed up. How should you feel?
Right.
Well, no, no, I get that. I get that. I go, no, 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 stop, stop. How should you feel? We have to slow down that much.
Yeah.
And it's just saying, like, you will always have an emotional reaction to something. We can get into
Mhm.
the semantics of whether it's socially learned or not, or
Right.
biological. I don't care. I think that's a complete waste of time.
Yep.
With few exceptions. If somebody's got such heightened stress, that's
Yeah.
where I might pull the CBT box back in for a minute, just to unpack it a little bit,
Yeah.
so we can have some answers in place,
Mm.
and then we can move forward. Um, but that's rare when I pull the CBT box out, where I'm like, interesting. So how did you learn it? When did you first start thinking this way? How did
Yeah.
you learn that? When did you start agreeing with it? I'll go down that line
Mm.
if somebody's really low confidence issues.
Yeah.
Um, even
Well, I
though
wonder
the
the other thing, like
oh, go
with the
ahead.
irrational kind of beliefs that CBT or REBT kind of identifies too. I don't know if that ever feels helpful. Like, oh, maybe we're doing some black and white thinking there, or some all and nothing, or I
Yeah,
don't know.
well, you just got to be careful when you get in and out, because this is the one thing I think that's, from a mindfulness perspective, you do have to be careful of, because every time you reinforce a negative or a positive, right, when you're saying it, you're really kind of undercutting the idea of non-judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So almost, if you, oh my God, I never thought about it this way, but I guess a good way to think about it is like operant conditioning,
Uh-huh.
rewards and punishments.
Yeah.
But there's a third little line under operant conditioning called extinction. So I just don't draw attention to and feed into any of the negative positive stuff anymore.
Okay.
Once we're really into it, it's just like, it's a sensation, it's a notification. It might feel comfortable, it might feel uncomfortable.
Mm.
When I got into this with Chrissy, who will come in with ACT, she argued that that was a label. I said, maybe, but you got to call it something.
Right.
And that's where, maybe, but I feel like I've had my own personal experiences enough with it. I've read enough on it where it makes sense. Um, and when you see a lot of the literature out there, it's just it's a more distanced perspective on the experience, when I can say something like, I notice that I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that, but that's just, um, it tends to be a very circular conversation though, because we all experience it. And if you've never taken a mindfulness approach, it's like every client's almost like restarting the same conversation sometimes.
Hmm.
Um, some are more aware than others, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, but we still have to make sure everyone's on the same footing
Yeah.
with what we're trying to go with.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to get
Hmm.
this up there. I think the one at the end you might be most interested on. Um, but for everyone listening, this is still primarily fueled by three types of literature: mindfulness-based stress reduction, a little bit from wisdom literature, and then um, you will also see um, the textbook in there by Dr. Siegel, a science-based approach to mindfulness. So that book's in there. But there's just some core tenets. And so anyway, the reason I say mindfulness in the middle and you see pay attention in order to set intentions, mindfulness is very much an active discipline. This is not we're trying to make our mind free of things. That's not at all what mindfulness is about. Um, it is about heightened awareness. And it's about learning how to be present in the current circumstances, not free from the current circumstances. It sounds subtle, but it's a difference. And when we can learn to do so, it makes it much easier to be very clear with our intentions and how we want to be, and in this case, performance for those on the sports psych side. So when it comes to mindfulness philosophy, this is where uh, much pure mindfulness and wisdom come together here. The ultimate goal of mindfulness is to just fight automation. Are we living mindfully or mindlessly with how we go about things? Are we an athlete that just shows up to practice, do what's always told, doesn't really question things? It's not about an effort thing. It's really about slowing down. A nice way of thinking about this from a sports psych perspective is deliberate practice. Um, like routines should be very thoughtful. They should always have a focus point. It should never just be automated. We're really working on singular focus, slowing things down, paying attention, and anyway, continuing
Can I
on from
pause?
that.
Can I
Yeah, go ahead.
interject real quick?
Yeah.
I'm curious, like to play devil's advocate, you're with a team or an athlete who's like, what's what's wrong with just showing up and doing what coach tells me? I get the results. I'm doing what he says. Uh, why do I need to slow down and pay attention?
Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with that. I would definitely acknowledge that if that's live. Two, the reason that it's important is based on their goals. So if they want high performance, they want to be consistent. If a kid's in high school, it may not matter if he's talented enough. So you do have to sit there.
Yeah.
But I would still also push him, though, to think about the situations where what are the situations that are difficult? I don't leave it up for negotiation. Um, so you can still get it to how about those little situations that can elevate, where you're at if it's a performance situation. With some of these kids, though, if they're younger and
Hmm.
they push back and they're like, well, I don't think I really need it. I'm pretty good.
Yep.
Um, then it's a patience game
Yeah.
because I'll find you. I'll find you. And it's not about nitpicking, but I also like to point out then why things are going well. That's
Mm.
always my go-to after.
Yep.
Because if some kids are doing really well, then point it out. Hey, I noticed that this is how you're going about your day, going about practice. So then I point out, well, you don't need it because right now you're completely present. So what are the situations when you're not present?
Yeah.
So kids that are resistant like that, I always like to build them up a little bit before we start diving in. Because
Yeah.
they might be doing some things well. I just want to make sure they're doing it on purpose and not accidentally.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great question. Um, these are not skills per se. I think key principles, competencies, areas, whatever you want to call them, under mindfulness in general is awareness, attention, and remembering. Awareness and attention work together a lot. Um, and remembering, we'll go into that. It's not in this context you think it is, but those tend to be the three tenets of mindfulness around this idea of really slowing down and being very deliberate with how we're going about our experiences. So, first one, starting with awareness, awareness of present experiences. And this is where sports psych continues to kind of push this, and it's incorrect. We always look at it from an idea of kind of being mentally free or mentally clear. That's not it at all. We just want to be very aware of what's happening around us and very deliberate with it. We're not minimizing anything. We're not trying to push through anything. Um, because if we're aware of it, now we can also start paying attention to how we manage our attention, which we'll talk about on the last slide. Um, but just being present with the experiences by itself, even without formal training, starts allowing you to have a little bit more clarity just because you're just distancing yourself from the situation a little bit more just by being observant with it. Now that's a skill we'll talk about in a couple slides that helps promote awareness and attention. But think about awareness and attention almost as kind of like that infinity symbol. They all feed off each other. Um, so speaking of which, with the attention, this is where we can get in the habit of really being clear with our focus. From a mindfulness perspective, we're very much on the idea of single tasking. I know that's a jargon term, but if we're really present with what's happening right in front of us, it's just one thing at a time. Because the more we divide our attention, the less we get done. This is where cognitive psychology kind of comes back in. Divided attention is the enemy here. Focused attention is the goal. Because if we have focused attention, it means we're doing things on purpose. But we can't do that until we slow down and just raise our awareness. So that's why those two feed off each other. These are just concepts. We'll get into skills in a little bit, but the awareness and attention really feeding off each other, that I'm very present with the clear experiences and know how to set clear intentions with my focus with my attention. Remembering is also an interesting one. This is the simplest of the three, but it's not about just remembering things in general. This is, we need to remind ourselves to pay attention. Um, Especially today, things are very automated. We just have to remind ourselves, slow down and pay attention to things. Some of the informal training options for developing mindfulness work really well for this. Like, how often do we just sip on coffee and we're mindful about our coffee? Right? That's just a simple way, no meditation involved. You're just taking it in. It's a way to remind yourself. So kind of setting up those cues is a central tenet to this discipline. So when it comes to training itself, this is where we're going to shift a little bit more to the Western side of things. Um, and this is more the from the MBSR stuff. But there's three types of training. You're going to have informal, and then intensive. Informal is like what we just discussed, just doing little things. Maybe I'll set a daily goal. That's not a meditation. But if I set an intention for practice, or hey, this is what I want to focus on in practice, what's it going to do? It's going to slow things down for you. While I'm eating or drinking, if I'm just being mindful, observing it, that's a way you can start developing more mindfulness. Um, Formal is meditations. So that's where we're really having a deliberate intent with the meditation that we're working on. Focusing meditations are the most popular for a lot of reasons. But there's different variations of that as well. And then, of course, intensive. This is where you're full on going out, spending 3 days in the woods kind of thing. I mean, completely removing yourself. The word intense is a reason for it. It's a lot. And time is the main one in there. But you're doing a whole lot besides just meditation in those types of retreats. But those are kind of three common ways you can work towards developing mindfulness. When it comes to skills themselves, this is where now each of these can help promote growth, right, in your awareness or your attention competencies of mindfulness. But we're really looking at focused attention here first and foremost. Where do I want it? I think from sports psych, this might be one of the easier ones to promote, because focus is different than a thought or an emotion. Thoughts and emotions come unconsciously. Once they're coming into our awareness and they're conscious, we just put focused attention on it. So this is a great way now this is where educating on um, sport mastery can really help with focused attention, right? Where do I like to have my attention while I'm competing? Things of that nature. It starts giving them targets, focuses things in. You can play around with that with different types of self-talk, whatever. But the point is, we can practice focusing. One of my favorite meditations is just observing breath. When I talk about focused attention, I still like to talk about it from a you'll see both of these, open monitoring and focused attention. I do like to talk about it from a perspective of observation, though, because it just creates that distance. Open monitoring is just like thought watching. It's wild. It's really fun, but this is flat out observation. Um, they'll talk about this a little bit more just around awareness in general. I think this just makes it more concrete. Can I just start engaging in exercises and be more observant without the judgment, so I can really kind of work my way through it? It doesn't mean I'm practicing acceptance. This just means I'm just teaching myself to watch,
Mhm.
right? That's all it is. Um, and we can do this internally and externally. Some of the most difficult meditations I've also ever done is the thought monitoring, because then you're watching thoughts as they come up. It's almost like Netflix, and you're teaching yourself to get in and out.
Mm,
It's a trip. It's
yeah.
fun. It's a trip though. Um, and I think it's a far more complicated one than just getting used to having a focused target like your breath, as you're practicing with mindfulness. But even in that, thoughts pop up. It's just the being more observant internally. I think is an extension of focused attention, and they complement each other really well. Um, but that's the other one, and then the acceptance. This is really now where we're talking about um, compassion, right? We're really just talking about I'm observant with compassion. So as emotions come up, just reminding yourself it's human nature. This is how things are. I really need to have that self-compassion, because I am human and I am not perfect. Um, so that's kind of the three tenets there, big picture. I put this here because this is, oops, whoops. I put this here because I think this is the biggest difference between those who get it right and mix it up. Um, Once we go down this path, we do want a consistent language. So if I am talking about thoughts and emotions, if I'm using terms like positive and negative, kind of which animal am I fueling here, right? So those are just things we have to kind of keep in mind. Now, if athletes do this, I've stopped harping on them. When I first started teaching, I felt like a little taboo button. It's like, nope, don't say that. And now it wasn't anything annoying. We just kind of joked about it. Now I don't bother. Because it's not the meaning behind the word. It's just the word came out. And so that's where you can kind of check on it. Um, but probably even more so positive and negative. I think it's just the idea of what is it? So I think if you can have a solid education with clients on what is a thought, what is emotion, how is it different than focus, if you can get at that level, then I think these concepts really fly. So those just be some things to consider if you're looking at doing this approach. Some supporting research that I think really helps. wisdom comes from ancient philosophy, and it mirrors really well a lot of tenets there. I think it really opens up um, broader perspectives on what it means to be mindful, to be thoughtful, um, to be introspective. So that's why I think it really cultivates that mindset around mindfulness really nicely. And I do have the Kim's assessment here, so I'm just going to pull it up because this is where you can really kind of put it all together. So similar to any other mental skills training program you end up doing, having an assessment with it is important. And you can see here with the phrasing of the questions, like any one of these questions can fuel an entire set of skills training.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get really creative with this because it just really helps focus the conversation. Now, this one is based on MBSR. This is the Kim's assessment, but I want to jump down to the bottom first, and we'll go back because it's not completely like the three components I described, but they're all right in there. How observant are you? These two are awareness related to awareness. My ability to describe things vividly, my ability to act with thoughtfulness and awareness, my ability to accept without judgment. There's judgment questions in there. So as you're practicing and training, you would expect progress in these areas, right? So if I'm working with someone for the first time, no matter how they score, you would expect them to continue to grow. So going up to what's one of the questions? I would expect this to be pretty high for your high achieving athletes. That's just something they're really in their head, right? If they're your alphas, they're your high achievers, they do not accept mistakes. So probably so this would out of all the questions, if that's the lowest scoring question, so even though this might be one factor, by the way, so just for those listening, just as a reminder on assessments, each one of these questions represents a sub factor into the larger one. So maybe their overall observation score was decent, but they scored really low on 21 and 25. Well, that's where you're training. So maybe overall they might be mindful, but then after, where did it go? I noticed after mistakes, this is high. All right, we are just training that situation now. I'm beyond you on it. So that's just an example. When I'm doing something, I'm only focused on what I'm doing and nothing else. That's a great indicator of concentration. So, depending on where you're seeing people score, you can modify the training a little bit. And you can either do that with certain attention strategies or meditations. So just things to consider. I just wanted to highlight this. But if you're going to do mindfulness-based training, you need a mindfulness-based assessment. Don't use other assessments because you're not going to be able to see the progress the same way. For clear reasons, I notice. That's a mindfulness term. When we're talking about autopilot, right? That's something related to mindfulness. So also just things to consider. You're not going to do the AXI 28 for someone who's doing mindfulness training. I'm not saying you wouldn't see progress. You just want to make sure they're aligned though, because you're not going to see as much progress if you're using an assessment that's not related to the actual skills that are being trained. So stop sharing there, but I just want to show that to the group. So that's kind of the basic tenets of mindfulness to keep in mind. And as we go forward, we're going to look at different specialty areas. So ACT, I'll also spend a little bit more time on MBSR directly. So today was a little bit of a hybrid with an overview, plus certain examples to just kind of get people thinking as we go forward. So thank you all for that. I'll edit the rest of this now after. Thank you, Ben, for letting me kind of get that out to the group. Didn't mean
of course.
keep you. Any other questions or thoughts from your end?
I mean, I would say yes, but I have a client at 5, so I need to be mindful of
Oh, got it.
getting
Yeah,
out of here on time too, and not going down too many rabbit holes. But No, it was great. I took a lot of notes and actually I'm seeing an athlete later this evening. So and one who is definitely struggles with this mightily. So this was kind of a nice, exciting primer and hopefully make a way forward with him later tonight. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, keep us posted. We'll
Yep.
chat about it in the group maybe. See how it
Yep.
goes. But all
Thanks.
right, Brent. Well, thanks. Good to see you.
Yeah.
And talk more soon.
All right. See you.
All right. So for everybody else, just as a recap, with mindfulness, just keep in mind the basic tenets and philosophy. Um, first, while you're starting to look at some of the psychology applications that you're going to see. So we'll continue to talk about this. Hopefully, this gives you a little bit of an insight of some things to consider and different ways you can set it up for using in your practice. Have a good night.